You're live as in on YouTube.
No, we're on LinkedIn right now, and wow, just leave it live. Let's be live.
Fuck it. Let's do it live.
All right,
Yeah,
fine.
that's it, dude. Joe Rogan style.
No, Bill
We don't
O'Reilly
know how to
style.
turn live off.
We're
We're engineers. We don't know.
Who the heck knows?
uploading.
Anywho, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Strictly from Nowhere. I'm your host, Justin Abrams. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cause of a Kind. We build software and websites for you. We also build software and websites for ourselves and solve a lot of novel problems as we find them along the way. And today's going to be one of those magical episodes where we've identified a problem that has been in our faces for quite some time. We'll talk all about where the problem originated and what we're doing to solve it. But today I'm joined by my co-founder and chief architect and CTO here at Cause of a Kind, Mike Rispoli, as well as one of our senior engineers, Brian Magoo. And the two and three of us are going to have a conversation today around optical character recognition and something that we've had a little bit of a challenge with along the way, which is taking documents. They could be images, it could be PDFs, it could be things that just look a little bit strange, and then turning them into a way of processing them so we can extract the data and move forward with different software as an operation. So I'm joined today with Mike and Brian to kind of unlock why this is a problem, where we found this, what the origin of it was, and what we're doing to fix it. So, Mike, Brian, welcome to the episode of Strictly from Nowhere. Can't wait to learn a little bit about OCR and what the heck we're doing to solve the problem. So, Mike,
Amazing.
let me ask you a question, buddy. How long ago, it's been quite some time, how long ago did we originally figure this problem out? And do you remember what the original customer was without dropping their name?
Yes, I do. I do. I remember we came across this problem. It's not that OCR solves the problem or optical character recognition. It's just this idea that I have a whole bunch of documents that I need to read that are images, they're PDFs, PNGs, JPEGs. I need to get the text off of them into a format that a computer can understand, into basically ASCII text. That is that is the problem, and it was a I want to without saying their name, they're in the insurance industry, and they process somewhere in the order of millions of documents like this every single year around having to do a redaction of documents. But they decided to continue with their labor force. So I think it's actually really rather interesting. It's one of those few instances where there's a lot of talk about AI taking people's jobs. We actually looked at a solution, tried a solution, talked about pricing the solution, and they decided to keep the team of 8 or so employees because the accuracy of the OCR really couldn't be guaranteed at the time. Even now, we'll talk a little bit more about it. And there were a lot of unknowns around the security because the security protocol under which their software needs to run is a big deal. You can't exactly use commercial LLMs in their current form, or it was at the very least a gray area to handle. Um, it came up again, and this is where Brian comes into the picture for a customer that was looking to proofread design documents against a given spec. And once again, we did a bunch of OCR testing there. They, I don't believe they moved forward either with their OCR solution. They liked it. They felt they saw the potential in it, but ultimately it was like, oh, it's not ready yet for us to totally can the workforce or do it in this way. Or at least they didn't want to put the they probably would buy a SaaS solution that did what they needed to do, and this both of them probably would have done that actually. But the question is, did our company, want to go down the as a service provider? Do we want to go down the path of building a SaaS solution in this realm? And I think the answer we've always said is yes, eventually, and that eventually might have started in the last 2 weeks. So that's kind of the intro to why OCR has always been on my mind.
And so for me, my curiosity originally is like, we gave a couple of examples of customers that had this. It was kind of a side a kind of a side problem to solve for a couple of them. Sometimes it's not the primary problem that were brought in. The original customer, it actually was the primary problem. It was a large labor force that they wanted to try and utilize the solution to replace that talent, something more efficient, maybe even more accurate, definitely faster. But this seems to now be not necessarily the problem, but a piece of the problem that current customers look to solve. So I think you were talking about it a little while ago. We've now come across this, I don't know, a half a dozen, maybe even closer to a dozen times across projects. It's always like with a little bit of a wrinkle, but I find that this is an interesting topic to work through. This doesn't exist on the market.
It does. It does. The way we do it today is we use Google Vision, which is your top of the line. And I don't want to call that OCR because I actually used that misnomer with customers and many times. And now that I've implemented OCR, I've learned, wait a minute, Google Vision is not OCR. Google Vision is a whole bunch of things. OCR is just one piece of it to pull text off of documents, and it is incredible. And I now can say it's incredible with such enthusiasm because I have seen what OCR does out of the box with what exists out there today. And Brian, we've seen that too. And wow, Google Vision does a bunch of incredible things to extract text accurately off of your documents. So if you're looking for a commercial solution, I think Google Vision is about as good as it gets. We use it for like a bunch of projects. And it really is great in that way. And then you can couple it with an LLM to turn some of the data you're pulling out to try and extract JSON from it or to structure that OCR output. And it is quite good. So if you're looking for a commercial product, Google Vision is it. The big thing that I sometimes come across is there's the paid component of Google Vision. And when you look at an order of magnitude of millions of documents, you quickly run into having to pay quite a bit of money for this type of thing. If you're not doing that many documents, it's not going to turn into that. There's speed constraints. There's all these types of things. So when we talk about why I got interested in the solution I put forward is I really wanted to see like, well, how far could I take an open source solution? Like, so it's really not, I called my library Active Storage OCR for Ruby on Rails because I wanted to get away from this idea of needing a third party provider. But now it's turned into, well, how close can I get this to work as like Google Vision? Maybe it's not going to be quite as good. Like Google Vision will take a crumpled receipt out of your pocket and extract the text off of it. And like Brian, I think one of the first tests you did on my library was like, let me just take a picture of like the dealership window sticker of a car, like something with like very difficult. And it's like, of course it shits the bed, right? Like, so, yeah. So I think, yeah, you go ahead with that.
It's so interesting because like with OCR, I think like some of the things that happens, like to break it down with some of these libraries is like, it tries to correct and like unify or like, yeah, it tries to like correct the image. Like it'll like tilt it in like a specific way. If it thinks that the image is, off kilter, it'll like try to create like grids and like lines and just like make sense of the organization of the document. And like the thing that I showed in that or like the test image that I used had like multiple text from different in different sizes, like somebody had like written something like vertically on the side, and it just and these are like really challenging images, especially and again like images versus PDFs, like all these different image types get, handled very differently. PDFs are just HTML, so it's like, or XML, or I forget exactly which markup language PDFs are in, but so that's handled very differently than an actual image itself, and so yeah. That specific instance maybe was not the best test example for this specific library, but like, I think understanding the limitations of specific libraries and the benefits as well is really important when trying to create some sort of system that can process images and extract text from them. Whether and there you have these different levers, right? You have speed, which this Rust library is great for. You have third-party interaction and like the security that comes along with that, and some other things as well. But yeah, I think this Rust library is really cool. I really love how this library actually will spin up a server in Rails, just as a gem package, because I feel like this is, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but with something like Next.js, I'm not sure exactly how you would, like, I think you would have to spin up a separate server and then actually, I'm not even sure, like it seems like Rails handles this in a much more graceful way than some other frameworks would.
Yeah, well, I think what you're discussing is like other frameworks like a Next.js. The typical deployment target for most people is like a Vercel or like a Lambda type environment. And so in that world, you can't really spin two servers up. Now, because I'm deploying Rails to fly and I have a long running server, I can actually spin up two applications and speak over HTTP. Now, one of the things that I could have done too is you could do gRPC. I could even have done like an FFI, like so I could actually not spin up the Rust server and actually call Rust from Ruby. That was another option that I had explored, but I really wanted this. I liked this idea of there being a Rust server running inside the server to handle this computationally intensive task, kind of off on its own. And I was like, oh, this is so cool.
Standard, right?
That exactly. Well, the inspiration came from a library called Anycable, which I had read about for Rails, which is a replacement for ActionCable written in Go, so that you could handle more WebSocket connections in your Rails code bases. And I thought, oh, this is pretty incredible. And they actually supported HTTP or gRPC as like, and I think they support another protocol to communicate between the two servers. But that inspiration led me to think, that could work for this. And I thought that would be really cool if you could upload an image to active storage, users could continue to do what they do, but then the OCR is kind of just happening off to the side, and I could write that and any kind of pre-processing, which we'll get into later, which is now becoming like the idea of this becoming more of a vision library. All of that can be done in Rust instead of something like ImageMagick, which would take up a lot more memory out of the system.
So is this spinning up like a separate machine in Fly? Is that what's happening? Like,
no, it's running on this. It's running in the same machine.
Okay.
Same machine, just exposed under a different port. So it's running in the same machine, and so when you run like locally, if I run the demo locally, what happens is it stands up the Rust server and it stands up your Rails server. Your Rails server is like localhost 3000, like you're used to. And I think on Fly it's like 8080 or something. And then I think the Rust server is 9292 by default, but you could define a different port if you were using that port for something else. And basically any application technically on that server could communicate internally to that. That port's not being exposed to the general internet. It's just being exposed to your application. So it's really pretty cool the way that the whole thing works. I was pretty impressed with the way that it works. I love this idea of like, and I really had this. So a very different way that I went about developing this gem too is I went at it with this idea of this is what I want the developer experience to be. You bundle install the gem. You're going to run bin Rails install, and that's it. Now it's so funny because as I'm developing it, I'm using Claude to help me out, and it's like, oh, and then they're just going to have to install Tesseract on the server. I go, no, I don't want any of that. So I kept pushing it because I knew the DX that I wanted, and I was like, no, it's static binaries. I do not want you to have to figure out how to get this running on your machine. That I wanted it to really come with the gem, be bundled with the gem, and to work out of the box really well for people.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I think that's like such a clean interface. Like I've had to deal with, I worked at a previous company where we had to, God, I'm just remembering this now. Like we wanted a version, like a free, like a open source version of Excel that we want so we you know we needed this huge package which had all this like Microsoft, I forget what it's called. Mike, you maybe know what I'm talking about, but it's like a Microsoft suite, like Libra, I think it's like Libra something. And in,
LibreOffice. Yeah, I got that on my.
and man, in order to like just like the size of, like because what we were trying to do is we were trying to convert, we were trying to do some sort of document conversion, and like just the size of this package for the limited amount of things that it was doing, and within our Next.js application, like or actually, sorry, this was on Python. This was in the Python backend for this specific project, and just the size of this application. Not we weren't really like going to run up spin up a separate server for this, and just being able to have that developer experience of installing a gem, a separate server runs that's managed within its own within its own confines, is great, and I think I don't know, I love it, so well done.
It's so cool. I had never, it's so funny. I feel like I never had developed something like that in this method before, where usually I'm like, I just need to make it work first, and like, I may apt install or pack manage a million different packages or whatever, and then I get the whole thing working locally, and then you go to deploy it and you're like, God damn it. Like, that, and you're like, now it's like you're trying to figure it out. And then you're like, okay, I got it to work. Now I'll clean up the developer experience. But with this, I was like, no, I was after a very specific, I really led with a very UX driven approach to the developer experience. And that's such a new way to develop. I feel like for most of my career, when we build applications, there's always like a product manager, and then there's designs, and they come down and we develop to the user experience we want. But we don't do that for developer tooling. But I feel like now we do.
I mean, with that, like, so, with that tool that I was working on a while ago, like that GitHub Action, right? Like, that's a great example of like, I mean, and I'm doing the same thing. It's like, I was like, okay, what's the best way for me to, in this tool, if for anybody listening, its goal is to use AI to like do QA testing on your website. And, and yeah, that was my whole thought, is like, okay, so I could do it like, I could make this some script that you run locally. I don't know, there's a million different ways to do it, but like having something just that you like press a button and it works is so amazing as a developer. And not having to manage, like this thing is like reading your code base, reading your changes, deciding what like needs to be done. And yes, it's a little bit more black boxy, and I think there's also that argument, right? Which is like, but I think like we are working more and more in Rails, and like and working within these systems where somebody makes that decision for you, and it's like, yes, there is less flexibility from your perspective, but also you can move a lot faster, and like just getting things done is so important. I think like I am moving so much in this direction of like, it matters that the thing is done, that we can do this thing, and it's like, forget, like, just do it in a really good way and make it configurable, and like, and maybe this is a direction that we're moving with AI development in general, is just like people are focusing more on accomplishing tasks and big projects in limited amount of time, and maybe the nitty-gritty details become less important in those. Like, so long as it works, if you're able to scale it, if you're not seeing issues, your users are all happy, your clients are all happy, like you understand the code base, like you have good, it's not brittle, like as long as all these boxes are checked, like, great. Who can complain about that?
This was like, it's very, and I could talk. That's what I was going to say, is like, there's a fine line, and I love. There's a talk by Rich Hickey. I reference it all the time. He talks about the difference between simple and easy, and he talks about how like simple is great, but easy obfuscates complexity. And I wanted to be very careful in my building of this, that I was trying to create something that was simple to use, that had the right amount of easy, but didn't obfuscate massive amounts of complexity. And I think that sometimes, we talk about like Next.js and Vercel. That's an example of something that is so easy to use, but it obfuscates massive amounts of complexity under the hood. And as your code base starts to grow, you start to run into that being a problem, because you're like, wait, there is like my compile times are up and there's all sorts of caching and this stuff's going on. And I don't know how any of this is working, and it's really not available for me to tweak in a very meaningful way. So I wanted to stick to this idea of, it was going to be easy to install, but still simple. Like, hey, like for example, OCRS, which is the Rust OCR, it's a static binary. Tesseract that I used, there was this option to install and do multi-language and all that. And I'm like, no, Tesseract static, we're going to start there. It's going to work with, basic Latin characters. People, that's the use case we seem to see all the time. But I'd leave, and I love the idea. This is the beauty of open source. If you are the person who's like, hey, I need to be able to do like a Russian or any kind of Cyrillic language, something, it's open source. Like, open up a pull request, like think of a way to integrate that, because I do think that there's an option for now I've left open the hatch for, hey, you can make a more complicated deployment, but the out of the box deployment should be fairly easy to get going, but not. And again, it's just a hard line to tread. Am I obfuscating too much complexity? I don't think so in this world. I think it's a fairly easy code base to read, fairly simple to read. And again, when it came to the dev experience, I sort of forced myself to go through it. I also forced like Claude through it too. And I said, hey, you're going to stand up a fresh Rails code base and you're going to use this gem, and I want you to. And then as it would encounter problems, I would be like, well, that's not an acceptable problem. So like, now we got to fix the gem. Like, so that kind of thing, to try and bridge that gap. But this is always the challenge of developer experiences. Am I exposing too much API surface area? Because we usually want to have like deep modules with like very tight, lots of functionality, but I don't want to make it so that you have to configure the whole thing. So what's what are the sensible defaults? And then the other piece that I thought was really fun about this was the actual Rust implementation. It's my first time doing anything like real in Rust. And one of the other things that a strongly typed language like Rust with an incredible compiler, when you talk about, man, it keeps AI on the rails in an incredible way, that like, if you're used to TypeScript, you and I know, like, I've moved away from TypeScript because I'm like, hey, like, if AI has escape hatches, it's just going to take them every time. And this is not really type safe if I can still run into bugs. With the Rust side of things, it is like, it will not compile at all. So like, I'm like, listen, you, Claude, don't even talk to me until this thing compiles, and it's like, with TypeScript, it'll be like, we'll save that one for later by adding an any type. And then I got to like run the linter to find out like that, oh, you did that. With this, it really was like, okay. And then I'd have it then I have to go and review and walk through all the code and kind of make sure that it's doing what it says. But there is having that guarantee was very nice on that side of things. And you don't, if your exposure to static types is TypeScript, you will find the TypeScript sometimes is starting to get in the way because it's not giving you type guarantees because of all the escape hatches Claude can take.
Yeah, I think this is something like, this is like a conversation that Mike, you and I have been having for months now, probably, is just like, what tools become better with like increased usage of LLMs for coding? Like, what languages and like what is your system that allows you to move quicker and build more and do so at a higher quality? And I think like experience that we're having is like, we have a client that's using is using Vercel and Next.js and at a certain size, like compile times start to get really slow. you need to build the app. You know, let's say you're having Claude make a huge change, and after it makes, or not even a huge change, but like it makes some change, and afterwards it wants to build. You want to build the code before pushing it to your remote, or and that ends up breaking your server. Then you need to restart your server. Your compile time is really long. Like you end up just wasting a lot of time within this whole flow, and like you end up kind of changing. And maybe like one thing that we'll do sometimes is or one thing that I've done in the past is have Claude have Claude respond to a prompt and then push that up to GitHub, and then go to a different task and do that same thing, just because the whole compile time, like server restart issue, slows you down so much, and then you end up context switching. But with a tool like Rails or like Rust, where your feed, I think Rust is very interesting. I actually have not worked with Rust, but like what you're talking about with type safety and compile times is these things make it so that you can just develop so much quicker in these instances. And like you really can't, like, considering that I think in the past this maybe would not have been so much of a problem, just because you were developing so much slower, and like you needed time to check different things in your code and
Think
like
about
review
it.
it.
Yeah.
But now that it's like I can just change an idea into code so quickly, like that feedback loop becomes so much shorter when you have a language that is more performant in these ways. So, but I also want to ask you, Mike, about speaking of kind of I was curious to hear your thoughts on where what is the best use case for this tool of yours, and kind of like where do you see it expanding into? Because I know there's some, as we talked before, there's some places where these OCR tools do not perform super well, and how would you kind of see yourself integrating this into a production system? And yeah.
Yeah, so I would go right away and say my main use case thought process was example was the insurance company that we talked about, and and I think the proofreading. So my thought was OCR for documents that needed to run in on-prem kind of scenarios too. So maybe you had massive amounts where in reality, using your own compute resources and servers is just going to be cheaper than using something like a Google Vision. And if you're doing straight PDF documents, just straight, and you don't have to deal with skew and colors and all that stuff, you're really not going to run into a lot of issues. As I created it with just OCR, you're going to have a great output for situations like that. As I started to do it, I thought about the use case that came up was receipts. In the case of expenses, in accounting systems, reading those, maybe not crumpled in your pocket, but a photograph or a photograph of a check. And Chase does a good job of this by making you straighten it out and things like that. But I thought, so what I'm adding today is a pre-processing step that will do things like increase the DPI, make it black and white, that's going to try and adjust for skew. It's not going to really do the grid situation that you were talking about, because I have to admit that I think if you have something really complicated like that, you're going to want to use a Google Vision. And then the question becomes, do I add the option for Google Vision by way of the gem, which could hey, here's a commercial option for this instead. I don't know. But my original thought was, hey, these are folks that are in security constrained environments that can't really use a third party or a commercial tool at the moment and want the on-prem or the free. In this case, it's basically free to you to use, the free use case. That was my thought. And then on top of that, I thought, okay, then if we can get that good enough, do we eventually offer a SaaS offering on top of that, which is, again, I think that in the ultra secure environments, that's a very valid use case of again, we run into this more often. And for most of my career, I never ran into so much talk about on-prem as I have in the last year and a half, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But there's a ton of companies running on-prem software, tons, and they do it because they have their own servers. They've already invested in the hardware. They want it, and they also don't want to be calling a lot of third-party APIs. They have very big concerns about when that data goes into Google Vision, what's happening to it. And so that is my thought process around this was, how do I make this as great an experience as possible for those use cases where we don't need to kind of integrate with these third-party APIs, and you can be guaranteed that your images are staying within your solution, within your server environment. And then who knows, from there, it's probably a great use case for startups too, that are like, hey, I don't want to sign up for Google Vision right now. I just want to see if people are using my thing. So I think that a little bit of pre-processing plus the OCR, and then potentially a post-processing step, which gets a little tricky, which is like trying to spell correct and things like that to detect errors. But then you have to think about, was the spelling intentionally wrong in certain cases? So like that's like branded terms and stuff. So that's good. It's so funny how like you think AI is going to like take away the amount of software that needs to be built, but just by like pulling this thread a little bit, I'm like, okay, wait, there's like a whole bunch more that I could be doing now, like to make this even better. And it just begets more software that needs to be built.
No, totally. And I think like that's kind of the, I was having the same thought, because like it's such an interesting like product design question. Like, okay, you have this tool that does this like kind of specific thing in this specific way in this specific environment, and it does it well. And like, and then you kind of start layering on these different features. Like you're talking about the pre-processing, you're talking about post-processing, you're talking about like there's all these different layers of directions that you could go. Do you want to go in that direction, or do you want to keep this thing dead simple and let this kind of plug into the rest of people? Like it really depends on how folks use it. And like some of these like mega successful libraries just do like the simplest stuff. And sometimes that's just like what people want. It connects into this larger piece of your system, and then it's amazing. And now it's like, if there's a bug in this thing, it's going to take down the whole internet, so it's really interesting to kind of see, as you develop this product, as you develop this gem, do you want to layer, do you want to, plug in with third parties? Do you want to say, okay, like this is one, like how would this in a production environment, like supposing that accuracy is of the utmost importance, and maybe this is not, because with some of these, like I was actually working a while ago with a different client on a similar tool. They like were taking receipts from like international shipping and like doing all this different stuff, and like for them, like these receipts were becoming like a ledger for their clients. And it's like, you really tolerate error in a lot different, you have a lot different error tolerance in these kinds of systems. And it's like, so the question kind of becomes, okay, you have this one package again, like that does these things really well and really fast, but doesn't serve all use cases. Like, how do you tie that in? And how do you, how does that change those levers of like speed, accuracy, privacy? And it's just a really interesting kind of dance, and I'm curious to see the directions that it goes.
I'm also curious.
I agree.
How this goes. I'm just super proud that like this is our first real open source project, and I don't know if there's any way to know the types of projects or businesses that this impacts in the future, but it's kind of exciting to think about somebody else is going to find this problem and implement this solution, and we put something out into the world that is going to grow, and that's really exciting. I'll put the in the show notes, you'll give me a link to the repository where this is held, and maybe some instructions for folks to spin it up if they want to take a look. I also think that we're going to produce probably a Dev 2 article just to share a little bit more of the technical side of it. So we'll put all of that stuff in the show notes. But Mike, Brian, I just want to thank you guys for continuing to push the limits and fill holes that we find all over the place, and build little products and services and solutions to help everybody out. But thanks, fellas, for joining this episode of Strictly from Nowhere and giving us a little bit of your thought process around OCR and its progress.
No
Peace.
problem.
Anytime.
Amazing.